Margaret is here to talk about the opportunities and challenges in the education sector in this digital age, and also the way Australian universities, in particular Monash, are dealing and surviving with an education market that is increasingly global. Margaret will speak for about 20 minutes or so, and after that is more than happy to take your questions. Please welcome Professor Margaret Gardner.
I've been asked to speak about education in the age of disruption, and that is indeed what I wish to speak about. So in 2011, Clayton Christensen and Henry Eyring opined, a disruptive technology, online learning, is at work in higher education, allowing both for-profit and traditional not-for-profit institutions to rethink the entire traditional higher education model. Private universities without national recognition and large endowments are at financial risk, great financial risk, they said. So are public universities, even prestigious ones. Now, Christensen is the father of the notion of disruptive innovation, and here he is, in that quote, applying his thoughts to university education, and the thoughts he had are not held by him alone. In 2012, in an article entitled "The End of the University as We Know It," Nathan Harden wrote, "In 50 years, if not much sooner, half of the roughly 4,500 colleges and universities now operating in the United States will have ceased to exist. The technology already driving this change is at work, and nothing can stop it. The future looks like this," he says. "Access to college-level education will be free for everyone. The residential college campus will become largely obsolete. Tens of thousands of professors will lose their jobs. The bachelor's degree will become largely irrelevant, and 10 years from now," and I hope the president of this institution was taking note of this, 10 years from now, Harvard will enrol 10 million students. Now, these are the sort of statements that are, I suspect, dear to the hearts of journalists and press clubs because they're big and bold, and they make a bold prediction for the future. So the story of technological disruption that they are referring to in those quotes, the story of that technological disruption profoundly changing industry is indeed familiar to all of us. Two industries which have recently experienced the shock of the future, newspapers and music, are often cited as the exemplars of the future of universities. The internet and its ability to provide more immediate and extensive ways of accessing content is the principal driver of disruption in this story. It allows aggregation and disaggregation of content, as well as dispersion of content to larger groups of people than possible through previous forms of delivery. This technologically driven increase in access to and customisation of news or music would be an unalloyed good, were it not for the impact of these changes on the content producers and the organisations that have traditionally paid them for their content. And so we can understand how experience of the impact of the internet on these content producers, journalists and musicians, and their organisations, newspapers and record labels, was extrapolated to the university. Commentators cast academics as another form of content producer, and the university merely the organisation that pays them. So when teaching content can be sourced in these thoughts from the star professors, distributed to the world via the internet, and then understood by people in their own time and at their own place and at their own pace, they reason, these commentators, there'll be fewer professors needed, and they need not be employed in the ivy-covered or stone-coloured walls of a campus. And so Martin Smith, a rather neat economist, predicts that in the future, universities will be masters of curation, working as talent agencies. They'll draw royalties and licence fees from the content professors create and curate. In many ways, Martin Smith says, the role of the best universities will become even more focused on identifying, investing in, and harvesting the returns from great talent. Well, bold predictions, and you've read variations of them, I'm sure, many times. How real is this future for universities? What evidence is there of the path to disruption that's here laid out? But before I turn to those particular questions, I want to outline two other trends affecting universities which I think are quite important. The first is globalisation. Student mobility across countries in search of higher education has never been greater. And Australia is one for whom these changes have been very significant. For much of the last century, universities were attended largely by the citizens of the nation-states that housed their campuses. Universities funded by government, educating our citizens was the dominant Australian form. Yet in Australia from the 1980s, universities began to enrol fee-paying students from other countries, principally Southeast Asia. Today, as many of you well know, education, and this is overwhelmingly fuelled by higher education, is Australia's largest service export, generating in 2014 some $18 billion per annum for the economy. In Victoria, it is the largest export of this state. Universities have changed with their changing student population, growing substantially in size, becoming more dependent on fee-paying students, responding to global education markets. Some universities have opened campuses in countries outside Australia, such as my own, Monash, in Malaysia, India, China. In the course of making the education of students from anywhere in the world and the internationalisation of higher education core to the operations of our universities, other changes have occurred. Universities have spun out or partnered with successful colleges that prepare students for university from English language through foundation studies and diplomas. These businesses have also spread their reach across the world. Universities in Australia, and it's surprising how many people don't know this, founded IDP, which is now, as a public company, the largest and most successful company recruiting students worldwide. It's still owned 50% by the universities, Australian universities collectively. While we could always argue that universities, particularly the model we understand, founded in Europe, always served an international student population, the scale of what's occurred largely in the end of last century and this is huge, and it is continuing to grow and is changing the relationship of universities to the nation states they've traditionally called home. So that's one other big trend, and the other is massification. Massification of higher education. This is the shift to provide higher education to a larger proportion of the population in recognition of the need for higher skills for future employment. In Australia, the most recent policy manifestation of this trend was, of course, the introduction of what is known as the demand-driven system, with its target of some 40% of the 25 to 34-year-olds in the Australian population having a bachelor's degree. The extension of higher education to a significant slice of the population creates different expectations for higher education. And it also has and will continue to increase the size of the higher education sector in our economy and in other economies with similar levels of participation. And that 40% target is now quite a common target in economies that would see themselves as advanced and requiring advanced skills for their services and other sectors. In the past 25 years in Australia, the proportion of men, 15 to 64 years, with a post-school qualification rose from 45% to 61%, and for women much more rapidly from 34% to 60%. Since 1990, the proportion of men in Australia with a bachelor's degree more than doubled from 9.9% to 24%, and for women from 6.8% to 29%, as women are moving very fast, you know. Australian universities contributed some 25 billion or 1.5% of GDP to the Australian economy, educated 1.3 million students and produced some 300,000 graduates in 2014. So you begin to see what massification really looks like. It changes the whole way you understand an economy. The opportunities of globalisation and massification, while changing universities today, are the fuel, of course, also for disruption to support large online empires that will challenge the future of campus-based universities. Without those other trends, globalisation and massification, the possibility of generating revenues sufficient to support a large online challenge to universities becomes a lot less feasible. So we have to think of the three together. So what I think we can see when we look at this threat of technological disruption and what has actually been happening, and we are actually seeing and experiencing in globalisation and massification in this country alone, we can see that universities, a very, very old institutional form, have changed in the face of globalisation and massification, and the higher education sector has also grown as new players have found a new space to work and play. And before I turn back to what these things might mean for the path of digital disruption, let me make one more observation about universities and disruption. Universities are an integral part of every technological disruption we will ever experience in these years. By this I refer to the role of universities in research, and in Australia, of course, every university is required by law to undertake research. What happens to manufacturing when we can 3D print whole items? Whether it's a surgical implant or a jet engine, which Monash did quite recently. How does health change when we can target more personally and specifically responses to diseases or replace more of our vital body parts and organs? At Monash at the moment, we're working on the bionic eye. Australia developed the bionic ear. How do our lives change if we're able to harvest, store and distribute energy completely differently than we do today? What else happens when we better understand the neurological processes that govern our cognition or our moods? Research, the discovery of new knowledge and new solutions, is the ultimate potential disruptor of our world. But it is also the hope for a better future. Universities have provided the organisational succor for much research. And in Australia, in fact, the majority of research and development is carried out in our universities. And Australian universities, when you look at Australian universities, Australia's about 0.3% of the world's population, and we produce 3.9% of the world's research output. Universities are not a passive recipient of the technological disruptions that transform the world around us. They play an integral part in their creation. And so how will digital disruption affect them and higher education? What effect has digital disruption had on universities today, and what's the likely future path? All Australian universities that I know of have platforms to distribute digital content to their students. And this has changed some subjects and degrees profoundly and has barely touched the delivery of others. In other words, an innovation that is making its presence felt in the way we educate, but which is still working its way through the academy. The future is clear, however. Education will become more flexible, more formative, more personalised. The flipped classroom is on its way to becoming more common than the large first-year lecture. And I can say at Monash, we flipped the whole of first-year engineering, the whole of first-year science, a large part of first-year business, a significant bit of arts. And what is the flipped classroom, I hear some people saying to themselves? It uses online content to reduce lecture time, allows more group interaction, so that those groups can be engaged in activities that typically build more problem-solving skills. In fact, I can tell you that the research we've done on students and other people have done on students shows that with reduced lecture time, but with online content and a change to effectively the flipped classroom, which brings groups together, conceptual content sits at about the same level as you get from a large lecture. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm telling you that it's equivalent. But in fact, problem-solving abilities go up anywhere between 20 to 60%. That is important. The online platform for holding content and assessment allows for more formative assessment, by which I mean the ability to learn how to actually effectively complete an assessment task rather than being in the quick and the dead, you got it right, you got it wrong. It's like anything. We hope to learn our way towards knowing how to do it well. It gives more ability to interact on the areas that are most important to improve student motivation and learning. In other words, the digital disruption and harnessing its possibilities is vital to providing much better teaching and learning in universities in this time of globalisation and massification. For here is the promise of better education for all our students. And that's one of the things that digital disruption is doing. Every university that I know has some MOOCs, you know, the massive online content. They're at the moment mostly a way to experiment and to get content out and see what's happened. Monash's biggest MOOCs are food as medicine, I think at the moment is the big one. The large platforms, and we all know the names, Coursera, etc., edX, FutureLearn, the large platforms that hold these MOOCs are still experimenting with ways to cut the content that they provide for free into modules for which they will charge and to which they can provide some credit towards qualifications. This is very early days stuff. The reach of MOOCs is large, completion of them is very low, and integration with recognised qualifications is still low. So while this model has begun to emerge, and it's the model people had in their head when they talked about digital disruption, it has not yet expanded quickly. It's always an interesting thing about an innovation. Most universities also have one or more full qualifications that can be taken online. The cost of producing and updating materials and providing for interaction with students online and assessment has made the majority of these less financially viable than an on-campus degree. Arguably, this is because they are still, if you think in production terms, a form of batch production. Very large enrolment qualifications offered by a very reputable university, you know that Harvard with the 10 million students, would start to change this equation. But it's interesting, and I'd be interested to look at Harvard's forward strategy. This situation has not yet emerged in any significant form to date, and it's been tried. So all the apparent paths to digital disruption have been trialled, and universities have participated in all these forms of trial. Yet no trial to date has accelerated in a way that produces the disruption to universities imagined by those who see, and I quote from down, ancient institutions in their last days of decadence. So why? Why hasn't it gone the way people predicted? The path to disruption of universities is neither smooth nor assured, and for a number of reasons, and I'll give you three. The need for interaction between student and teacher in learning and teaching. The student must understand the online content provided in this digital age, and the path to understanding requires more than just interaction with other students. It's not like posting comments at the bottom of an online news article. It relies on teacher engagement. There is an interaction required for the transformation of information into knowledge. It's called teaching. This has not yet been able to be fully automated for many fields. It requires tutors to moderate discussions, to provide feedback on assessment. These are interactions that require qualified staff and time for each student. There isn't yet an easy mass solution to feedback, although there are methods in development that are attempting to provide greater automation of this. In other words, the promise of digital disruption, the path to personalised learning, relies on a series of interactions with qualified persons who know rather more than the person who's trying to get to the end of this particular course. And this interaction is subject to overall academic policies and interacts most importantly with professional accreditation requirements in many fields, all of which specify the types of academic and in some cases the numbers of them needed to provide surety of understanding by the student, as well as a whole series of rules that sit around what constitutes actual understanding in a field. The second one is the requirement for certification of knowledge acquired by the student. There are university rules governing the certification of a qualification. There are usually government or legislative requirements about who can certify that a degree has been achieved, and there are often rules about the nature of the learning required, and there are whole countries which preclude a totally online experience, one of those being China. These rules about certification are also usually embedded in forms of professional accreditation. People care who gets to be called an engineer or a surgeon or a dentist or a physiotherapist. The third one is the increasing tendency for recognition or certification of the quality of the institution providing the degree. Almost every nation or state has requirements about which institutions can offer degrees. Australia's recent experience in vocational education gives us a very clear picture of why these rules exist over and above concerns about what is required to achieve a certain qualification. We've just lived through that. The apparently borderless flow of digital content runs into the borders of national regulation as, again, society seeks to be assured that those certified are able to undertake significant professional responsibilities, that those who are certified to do that have been so certified by institutions on which we can rely. So those three regulatory hurdles, they're not all of them, are neither minor nor easily dismissed or overcome. As a society, we wish to be sure that our bridges and buildings will stand and be safe, that our health services will do no harm and hopefully cure, and so on. There are many degrees where, as a society, as employers, as groups of professionals, we require that deep understanding is gained by employing people who are in a position to teach and to assess that understanding in the students they teach. That is, in a form that will allow the effective practice of the understanding gained, and then that we can be assured that those who have certified to that knowledge are themselves to be trusted. We make the hurdles high for a very good reason, and they are hurdles to the quick undermining or dismantling of universities. As an institution, we rely on the university to provide for and assure us on all three grounds outlined above. They do so, usually in companionship with professional organisations and associations. They do so knowing that the industries they interact with want that to happen as well. This is why universities who responded successfully to globalisation and massification largely dominate the competition for students across the world. Because you have to say, who's dominating that movement in higher education? And I can tell you that it's universities. It is possible for a university to dominate more definitively in the future the online space and therefore to build a bigger global presence. But I'm suggesting to you that it's within a university or alongside a university that I would expect this new form will emerge most strongly, because in that institution they have already internalised the solutions to the regulatory hurdles I've just outlined. So I expect that higher education, and indeed universities, will be the source of their own disruption. I do not expect that it will be the end of venerable institutions, though I do think that the landscape will not look the same in the next 10 years. And I can make that prediction because the landscape looks very different now than it did 10 years ago. And so what do I think about this path to digital disruption? I think it is not a path that is taking the particular trajectory that those who made the quotes have seen in the analogies they made. Because like any disruption, you have to understand the nature of the field you're in. But what I do think is that that online possibility is an opportunity to be seized for the quality of learning and teaching and interaction with students for the type of learning that we wish to provide. It's the possibility of providing better education for more students, and that is a great thing. And this possibility in a place, in a country like Australia, with a high-quality university system, could, with the right investment and support for experiment and innovation, mean that that system takes a bigger place in the future knowledge economy that will dominate our future. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much for a thought-provoking address, Margaret. As we mentioned, we do welcome your questions. There is a handheld microphone held by Kate at the back of the room. If you'd just like to raise your hand, say who you are, where you're from, and we can open the batting. Yes?
Catherine Walter, Helen McPherson Smith Trust. Thank you very much, Vice-Chancellor. Very informative. As you were speaking, I was wondering whether the university model might fail for a different reason, and that is because, in a sense, its offering is a sequential range of degrees, bachelor, master's, PhD, or sometimes wider degrees across other disciplines. And as you were speaking about the future availability of learning in very different modules, I wondered if the notion of tertiary education itself might disappear as a construct, and instead one might look at obtaining learning throughout one's life in either a job-specific fashion or a pastime, interesting fashion, but not in the strictures of the university system, whether or not the university made itself modern by providing its traditional courses in an online context.
Let me say one thing. So people learn in all sorts of different ways, and we know that, like all of us, we read all sorts of content and pick up. I mean, there's a whole tradition of autodidacts who taught themselves through reading the books that made sense to them. So why do we care about qualifications? Now, I need to declare here that my first degree was economics. So the point about a qualification is it certifies to someone very clearly, who has no other way of knowing so, that you can do this set of things that need to be done. And in some professional associations, you are actually not allowed to do it unless someone certifies. That is usually the path to employment. The path to employment requires certification. In an age of massification of higher education, if you looked at screening theory and labour economics, I will predict to you that people will need more qualifications, more clarity about the specialisations they have, and will probably gain more qualifications over their lives than they have in the past. So I expect exactly the opposite of what you have suggested to happen. And I expect it because I expect the labour market to continue to operate in the way I have suggested. And it would only not operate that way if everybody was a self-employed person who could, and I still think we're in a series of professional fields where even if you're self-employed, we don't let you practice on my ears or my nose or my throat without a certain deep level of understanding, or that's how I feel about it.
Or setting official interest rates if you're an economist. More questions, please. While we wait for the microphone to go around, I just want to pick you up on something you said. You talked about the flipped classroom. Do you see in decades hence, despite what you say about the importance of teaching, but given all the technological advancements we are expecting to see a completely flipped university, a sandstone university completely online? Is that outside the realms of possibility?
No, I don't. That's why I said I think there is a possibility that a university could move to be completely online. And I can think of the sorts of universities that might do that. I think at the moment we are not able to, even with the best simulations in the world, able to effectively work our way through a whole series of professions entirely online for the reasons that I suggested about the practising on people's bodies and the notion that they should be able to do that before we let them out into employment to work on anybody else. But yes, I do think that possibility is before us, and that's why I said I think it is possible for a university to do that, to actually decide to make that big play, either by themselves or with partners. But I think it needs that ability to certify and qualify in order to make that model work. And that's what's, at the moment, inherent in almost all the legislation in the institutions we have.
Yes, please raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Yes, over here.
Hi, Marina Carroll from Architectors. I suppose I was interested in your thoughts on the development of the physical campus. So given that there'll be increasing focus on the digital disruptive technologies and, as you eloquently put, be the masters of their own disruption, how do you see and how are you rethinking how the physical campus will change and respond to these disruptions?
So let me just step back a stage and say why I think the campus remains important. And it does. I don't think it will be important for everyone. I don't think it will be important for every qualification. I think there's a type of identity forming, whether it's professional identity or personal identity forming set of experiences, which ranges of people will wish to have, which requires a very broad range of interactions and which are liable to bring them into face-to-face contact on campuses. So if I look at the campuses as they are now, somewhat ironically, as we've increased access to online material, and because in fact our internet speeds are faster than, and will be, I think conceivably now for some time, than others get in other places, the ability to actually engage with very rich digital content, ironically, is very heavily concentrated in the campus. And then our ability to access all sorts of material that allows people to work and make on the campus. So what's actually happening is we're building more and more informal spaces where people can sit, can talk to one another, and might actually just be sitting with their laptops and downloading. We're finding students are more sticky on the campus now than they were a few years ago. And I think as we expand the richness of our content and their ability to access it, we will actually be building the spaces that make, ironically, their ability to be there for longer periods of time and to interact with one another in sort of serendipitous ways. I think that will actually grow. I anticipate that growing for quite a number of years, because I don't think, if you talk to students currently and you ask them what they prefer, if I stood up here in front of a group of our prospective students, and I'm even 5 years out and I'm looking at some students, and said to them, we don't want you ever to come in. We don't want you to ever sit with someone else. We don't want you to ever, except over the internet, engage with the people who have the brilliant ideas and are working in the labs on the things that you're interested in or writing the great books. They would be horrified. And it's because of what is the thing they are seeking from that first qualification. Now, when they get to a master's degree or they need to do a grad dip in occ health and safety for some other reason, they'll make a different set of calls. But not the first one, and that's the campus experience.
Good answer.
Yeah, Mark Baker from the Press Club. Given this rate of change and the digital implications for the future of tertiary education, do we have too many universities now? I mean, you talked about the statistic from the US of 4,500, which is mind-boggling, but even in the Australian context, isn't it, from the economist's point of view, inherently inefficient to have so many institutions?
So if you took the Australian university landscape, on average, Australian universities are larger than most of the counterparts you'd find in the UK and the US. So Monash is currently Australia's largest university. Unless you get to a state university system, that is a system that is actually designed to cover the whole state in the United States, I cannot find a university that is an equivalent size, and there is no one within CUI in the UK. And Monash is large, but so are a number of Australian universities. And you'd say from that it's unlikely, therefore, that we've got too many. And people often ask, well, how large should you be? So I don't think we've got a problem of the general scale of universities in Australia. The question of more generally whether there are the right number of universities in any particular system is a totally empirical question. Can they survive? Are they providing quality? Are they allowed to remain? And I think that is the question to be asked. And I think it's the question about what's the quality of what's being done, what are the outcomes, and are they viable, whether they're government funded or privately funded? That's, I think, the question, because I don't think you can make a really simple decision about what the size should be.
Just on the international education market, which is growing like topsy, as you said, just looking 5-10 years into the future, do you see that growing further? And also, what are the potential hindrances or road humps to Australia taking full advantage of the international education market?
So, fundamentally, Australia's ability to be effective in international education is dependent on the quality of the education and the reputation of the universities in this country. If you talk to international students and they make a decision in the world about where to go, increasingly they look at rankings of universities, which are rankings that go to what's the quality of research of that university, because that's the only thing we really measure internationally, rightly or wrongly. That just happens to be the case. And so the reputation of Australia's universities as high quality research universities is vital to our continued success, and the quality of the education we provide when a student comes is absolutely really, really important. Then beyond that, the question of the market, in general, the aspiration for higher education across countries in the world is growing. It is a globalising market. People look now increasingly, where could I go, where can I go? And it's a question of what can I afford and where might I want to go. And so that's an interaction between the quality of the national system and what we offer here. And sometimes people want to go because for adventure I want to go somewhere else. I want to be with other people. I don't want to be here. I don't think it's a declining population out there, but I think the ability to be successful is fundamentally dependent on those two other things. Without them, if you are not as high quality as the top universities in the top band of universities in China, why should a Chinese student come? Ditto for India, ditto, that's the story. Because in the end, people are coming for a high quality but internationalised education, which I might say we actually do very well at present, but you would never take it for granted.
Lynn Bender, Helen Macpherson Smith Trust. With the changes in the employment market and the emergence of artificial intelligence creeping in, what is the future for graduates, university graduates, achieving jobs in the future?
Well, one of the consequences of massification is, of course, that the question of employability is now a much bigger question, because when it's 9% of the male population with a degree, that's a big difference to, over a quarter of the male. So we are actually dealing with the extension of opportunity to a bigger population, which I might say I think is a good thing. The it's perfectly clear that the nature of many of the traditional professions is changing profoundly, and the nature of employment is changing profoundly, and that is a challenge for us to work with professions and industry, and to also consider our research and to think what the professions of the future will be, and to also look at how we assist students, and more of them do this now, to think about how they might set up their own organisation or take their own idea out. So it has actually is changing the way we have to think about capabilities for graduates. It's changing the way we have to think about the curriculum. And those things are all in discussion. But again, I'm sorry to... labour, economics, the dismal science is what it's called. If you've got a series of people and someone has got a degree and someone has not, all the evidence is the person with the degree is more likely to be employed than the person without a degree, and that has remained invariable, leaving aside the broader question of what the overall employment market looks like. But yes, we do have to respond to all those changes, yes.
Thank you. Jim Clark, corporate writer. You mentioned much about the crucial need for research and for high quality in an environment where neither this government nor its immediate predecessors seem to have any appetite whatsoever for science and research. How can universities survive and grow and compete internationally?
Well, it is fair to say that in almost any country that I know of, the foundations of funding for discovery research are provided by government. I don't know of a country where government doesn't provide the basic how is it so, why is it like this, money for science, etc., etc. So if that is severely restricted, it will have an impact on the quality of that fundamental research. And while people talk a lot about applied research, the distinction between fundamental and applied research is a blurry one when you come to innovation, because we often don't know where the particular idea is going to take us. And if I was at CSIRO, I'd cite Wi-Fi. So it is a challenge if government funding contracts, and it is something we have to continue to advocate about, because the point I was making is this: there aren't many countries in the world where I could stand here and say, this sector you have in this country is actually the core of your largest service export. You'd be hard-pressed to say that in most countries I know. Now, the thing you have to do about economic development is think about where your comparative advantage lies. So I would say, and I think we will keep advocating along these lines, it is not an endless demand for funding, but it is a need for a recognition of what levels of funding are important for providing quality research and education. And if governments at the moment, or in times to come or in times past, have thought that isn't a good investment, then I think we have to advocate a little harder. But I don't intend to rest only on advocacy. Some of it is in our hands. We have to, and we are, going to the world. We go to the world. We have to talk to companies who have deep enough commitment to research and development across a broad and deep span that they are prepared to talk to us. Because the quality of research we do in this country is at an international level. It needs an international level of investment. And so government is part of that, but it is not all of it. And so we have to be able to talk to the people. If you're top of the world, and we are very high up, for example, in materials science, Australia's just, very good in this space, and so is my own university, but it's not the only one. if you're really good in materials science, you just stop for a moment and you think, well, what are we going to do with materials science? Where are the opportunities? Who's going to fund the next stage? Where are the innovations coming from? Well, it's not all happening here. Some of it will happen here, but not all of it will happen here. Some of the things we do will be the genesis of new industries here. I have, like everybody else, strong hopes that biomedical devices, given the outstanding quality of Australia's medical research and clinical medical research, is something that we could develop. And we have to work on all those things. So it's not just asking government, but unless someone's looking at the fundamentals and the things that government is responsible for in the fundamentals, then yeah, it will get much harder. We will not do as well. You will not actually be able to look out and say what I've just said. That every now and then in this world, you have to look out and work out where the very big opportunity is. We are not schools. We are huge, innovation-generating, disrupting, large institutions producing the next generation of people who will make the changes, not just here but around the world. If we're really good at that, and we do in international education, pound for pound, there's not a country in the world as good as Australia. We're actually that much better. You have to work out where the investment needs to go.
Julie Moss from Photography Studies College. Thank you very much for your presentation. I just wonder if you could reflect a little bit more on the teaching and learning side. I appreciate what you've just said, the huge institutions, massive innovation, massive amounts of research, but fundamentally there still is the teaching and learning at the core and the student engagement. And I just wonder, I'd be interested to just hear your reflections on the challenges for teaching and learning staff in a very sort of disrupted and ever-changing environment.
Yes, it's why getting the fundamental investment right is important. It is my personal view that one of the most important things we actually do out of research is not just the spin out of, ideas or the licensing of. It's actually the way that research feeds into the curriculum that we teach the next group of graduates. Because what we're doing, it's all those research ideas feeding into the curriculum fuels the next set of innovators or entrepreneurs. That's the other side of research. I think that's very important. It is certainly true that as universities grow, and as the diversity of the student population grows, and by that I don't just mean international students, I mean if you're taking a broader proportion of the population into your universities, you actually have to have a broader set of understandings of how people learn, how they will best learn. You have to bridge that diversity. And so you're asking for a bigger set of things from our university teachers. It's not, hello, I'm teaching people who look just like me, think just like me, do things just like me. That would be horrible anyway, but that's not the way forward. And so there are huge demands, and the ability to get up to speed and to effectively use what's possible out of these great new innovative tools, it's a big retraining exercise. I look back to when I started teaching, you're sort of writing on a whiteboard. Well, it's a big move from writing on a whiteboard. And so we've got a lot of things to do, to invest in, to actually harvest and harness that. And it does require investment in innovation in learning and teaching for that quality to be realised and for us to actually get what I think is this great opportunity. Because you think, how many finished their degrees before 1990? Yeah, so most of us. So most of us haven't lived in a world where there are these other possibilities. And to actually have a situation where you can give formative feedback to someone so they work out what it is they don't understand. So the teacher can actually see, they never opened any of that, so that's clearly boring as I better change what materials I've got. They clearly can't deal with this. I need to orient what I'm saying to that instead of the broadcast, which is what I'm doing to you. So what I'm doing to you is the old lecture model. And it's okay. And if I'm entertaining enough, you don't go out there and go, oh, save me, you know. But you've probably all heard something different. It would be probably mildly scary what you actually thought about it. We've got whole sets of new tools. They're just wonderful, just terrific, but we've got lots of things to do to make them work, and I think that's really important too.